The Iowa City landfill serves all of Johnson County and the cities of Kelowna and Riverside. We have about 125,000 people in our service area. We've had lots of recycling programs in place for many decades, as have many other communities across Iowa. One of my favorite ones to talk about is our composting program. And lots of other communities across Iowa have composting programs that were set up back in the late 80s or the early 90s when yard waste was banned from Iowa landfills. The biggest difference probably between our program and lots of other programs across the state, or at least most other programs across the state, is that we can take food waste for composting as well. The way that the law is set up through DNR is that organics can be taken into the amount of up to 2 tons per week at regular composting facilities, and in quantities larger than that, the landfill has to get a solid waste composting permit. So we have gotten to that. The story behind that is that our project actually started in 2007 as a University of Iowa led feasibility project, and I'm particularly proud of this because as a University of Iowa alum, it's really cool to look back and say this project started because of University of Iowa students. So in a college town, that's not all that unusual, but it's still something to be really proud of, I think. So the project started in 2007, and it started as an engineering student project from about 4 students. And they did the feasibility project. They looked at the numbers, they looked at the materials going into the landfill and what could be composted, what was coming from this one particular place, Hillcrest Dining Services on the University of Iowa campus, and said, we did this feasibility project, it made sense, we need to do this. And they basically convinced the university and the city that, okay, we'll agree to do a pilot project, and then here, if it goes well, if the university thinks it goes well and the city thinks it goes well, here are the next steps that we'll take. So through the feasibility study, it was determined that it went really well, it worked well logistically on this end, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But that first year we took in about 30 tons of organics, pre-consumer food waste organics from Hillcrest Dining Services. And the part of what we had agreed to is that if it went well, the landfill would pursue getting our solid waste composting permit. So we did that. That's probably one of the biggest hurdles that we've had. There's a lot of staff time involved in that and getting that permit amendment. There's also a lot of cost involved with that. So the issues with the cost were that we had to do a permeability study on our composting pad, which is about 6 acres. So we had to do some boreholes. We had to hire a consultant to do that test, and it was determined that we can use this. It met all the requirements as far as the impermeability, so that was okay. We did have to do some earth moving to have a retention basin for leachate, and then we actually collected the overflow from the leachate, or ran the overflow from the leachate collection into our actual landfill leachate collection. So most landfills already have a leachate collection system in place, or should, in theory. So that may not be such an issue for most landfills, but it was just doing the planning and doing the engineering on that, and then doing the earth moving. So there's definitely an expense and some planning involved there. Again, I would say that's probably been the biggest hurdle along the way is just working through that process, which took actually about 14 months. And a big part of that was on landfill staff, and that we hadn't worked through a permit amendment. I hadn't worked through a permit amendment before, so there was a big learning curve for me personally. But having been through that now, and several other landfills across the state have gone through that process as well, we're happy to help the other landfills work through that as they're looking at doing something like this, or even just answer questions about it. The DNR also is great about accessing or having access to staff and answering questions about the process. So I think that's probably gotten easier now than it was in 2007. I can only think that's the case. So since then we've really worked to reach out to our local grocery stores and restaurants to start diverting food waste. And part of the sales pitch, frankly, is that it's cheaper to compost. The difference in cost is from our average rate for tipping fees at the landfill is $40 a ton. Our organics tip rate is 24 tons, so there can be a significant cost savings there. The issue is that there's often not a hauler in the area to provide the service, so that is a hurdle, certainly. So we're really fortunate in Johnson County to have a couple of haulers who can provide that service. Johnson County Refuse is one, and that's a small local hauler, and the other is Green RU, which is a statewide or getting to be a statewide hauler. So we have a couple of options for our local businesses and grocery stores to get the food waste here. Of course, that's going to add to the cost of it. In theory, they should be able to offset, grocery stores and restaurants in particular, should be able to offset the cost of the landfill, or the cost of the composting by reduction in landfill tipping fees in their dumpsters. So that's been a little bit of a hurdle to convince restaurants and grocery stores that it's possible, but we are starting to see that's beginning to be the trend. And we've slowly added customers over the course of the past 6 or 7 years. I mentioned earlier that in 2007 we composted about 30 tons. That number actually dipped a little bit in 2008 to about 12 tons, and as we were working through figuring out what we were going to do with the pilot project and move forward or not, or how that all played out. So we dipped a little bit. 2009 we were back up to 36 tons. We were around 33 tons in 2010, and then things really started taking off, and that's a combination of the outreach that we did, and I think the outreach that other entities have done too. Between Green RU and Johnson County Refuse, they're out there selling this service that they provide, and it's coming to the landfill. The materials that they're collecting are coming to the landfill. Also through the waste reduction program, or waste reduction centers program, for food waste, we've definitely seen an increase specifically because of that over the past couple of years. So again, in 2010 we took in about 33 tons. The big jump was in 2011 to 103 tons, then in 2012 to about 170, and then last year with a lot of additional outreach, we actually more than doubled to almost 500 tons. So it's really exciting to see that come in, all that material be diverted from the landfill. About 25% of what goes into Iowa's landfills is organics material that could have been composted, and about 10% of that is specifically food waste. So it's really important to start looking at this material to see what else can be done with it, and we can handle it here. Logistically, we can actually handle it quite a bit more than we're taking in now. And the logistics of the landfill, we handle the material just like we do yard waste. It comes in, it gets ground up, we windrow it, we take the temperatures twice a week, we take the oxygen sensor reading once a month, and we turn the piles once a month. So it's absolute minimal involvement. It's the most basic composting that we can do. We don't have any special equipment with the exception of the grinder, which we actually had before we implemented the food waste program as well. We had that for yard waste composting. We also have a grinder for the back end of the process, so we can get out a screener at the back end of the process, so we can get out those bigger pieces and put those back in the beginning to go through again. So we don't have a windrow turner. We turn things with an end loader, so it is from a staff perspective, it is pretty time intensive, which is part of the cost, which is probably another hurdle, the cost, or the time of processing the materials. But the beauty of it is we have a huge demand for our end product. So over the past few years, as our numbers for organics have gone up, so have our sales of organics. And starting in 2010, from 2010, 11, and 12, we actually ran out of compost, and that was the first time that it ever happened. It was also the impetus for us to raise our prices. We doubled our prices from 2012 to 2013, from $10 a ton, which is about a pickup load of finished compost, to $20 a ton. And we didn't sell out in 2013, but we had a lot more supply build up too. So I think there's a couple factors working there. The only comments that we got from the public when we raised the price of our compost was that it's about time now, maybe we can actually get some. So the public was actually pleasantly, I was pleasantly surprised that the public was pleased that we raised our prices, because that's usually not how things work. So that's probably one of those take-home points, that it's like, oh, they really like this stuff, it's good stuff. So it's exciting to work on that. The public relations value of the compost is really important to us. Landfills don't always get a very good rap. This is kind of the end of the line for a lot of materials. So the fact that people are seeking landfills for this product, for this service, is really pretty cool, I think, from a waste reduction perspective. One of the other hurdles I alluded to a little bit is the cost of the program, and we do charge for the materials coming in, we charge for the materials going out, but there's a lot of staff time involved, and that's probably the biggest expense. The other part of it is when you compost, things break down so much that you might start with 100 tons, and I'm just totally making that number up, but you might start with 100 tons, but at the end of the process, because of the reduction over the breakdown, you're only going to be able to sell 50 tons. So there's a kind of a losing business model there already. So our process is subsidized by landfill tipping fees, but there's also something that we don't factor in, that we haven't been able to factor in financially, is the cost of the landfill space that's being avoided, that use. So it's really important when you think about when you dig a landfill cell that's 7 acres and costs $13 million, if we cannot put food waste in there, we're saving the value of that space. We're also saving the value of the mitigation of the methane that's produced. So there are values there that we haven't been able to put a financial number on, that the public understands, that the city understands, and we do really look at that when we make these choices to add these programs to our repertoire of other programs that we do. So moving forward, one of the things that I'm most excited about, I think we've done a good job of reaching out to businesses and restaurants and grocery stores. We'll continue to do that, certainly, because that's kind of where the larger quantities come in all at once. But we really haven't done a lot of outreach to households, and we'll be starting that this summer. Part of that effort for us is going to be not only keeping the stuff out of the landfill, because that's the worst place for it to go. It's better to compost it, of course, but the next best thing, the best thing overall, is to not produce the food waste in the first place. So we're really going to be working on talking with the public about, don't buy it if you're not going to eat it. Eat what you buy. Learn how to use your leftovers, freeze, preserve food, whatever, those upstream steps to get people to not be throwing food away, because it's also a huge financial burden on families if they're buying food they're not eating. So there's so many things that tie into this besides landfill waste reduction and organics, and that's just one of the little things that we get to work on when we're talking about food waste. So there's lots of things coming, and I think this is really, from a statewide perspective, I think this is really something that is going to take off as people understand that it's about the food that we buy and that we make, and it's really wasteful to have it end up in the landfill. So those are some of the things that we're working on. It's really exciting to be thinking about where this is going to be in the next few years.